Hola, sí. Buena tarde. Vale, perfecto. Me dicen que ya estamos. Bueno, pues...
We're on air, so welcome everyone to this second Red-Green Dialogue organized by Fundación Oswald Jones and the Green European Foundation. It is the second dialogue. It's a cycle that included the first impact of COVID before summertime. The second dialogue has to do with the minimal vital income and if it's equivalent to other formats. And I would like to thank you, the presence of the three people that are here with us today. I think this is it's a top cartel, it's a top group. It's three people that on their own could generate a huge debate, but the combination of the three is also very interesting. Aina Vidal is an MP from Comú Podem, person that has a connection with the world of unions, comisiones obreras, and she has worked in the Congress to cover issues related with the labor world, labor relationships, and she's a person that can contribute a lot with her opinion from a political standpoint. Okay. On the other hand, we have Pepe Fernández, Alberto, politologist. He's a researcher from the Higher Center of Scientific Research, and he can tell us about this minimum vital income concept. We can use him to learn about his standpoint, his context, and also whatever he wants to offer as a contribution, the differences he can see with basic income. And then we also have Philippe Van Parjis, any person who's read things about basic income is a person of reference. He's a person of reference he's been a reference person for a long time when very few people talked about basic income. Well, he was speaking about that, and therefore he should be here. He had to be here. He can tell us a lot about any theoretical or practical consideration about basic income. Well, with no further ado, I'd like to say thank you to those of you who are here. Any questions you have, you can send them both to the chat if you are following through Zoom or through YouTube, and I will group them and I will gather them, and at the end of the three interventions, I will ask the questions to the speakers. But in this new stage of our foundation, there's been an image change, there's a new course with new activities, and we are happy to show you a video clip how you do the Green European Foundation, introducing what is basic income, a very pedagogical video, but it may be interesting to have a framework of reference to determine what basic income is and how it is connected to Europe, because there is a strong debate in Europe on how to combine a basic income in the European framework, an element to consider. So click on the video and we'll be able to watch it. Basic universal European basic income, a recipe for resilience. The COVID-19 crisis and the expected recession are evidence saying that even if the public services in Europe are amongst the best in the world, they cannot guarantee the welfare of all residents. Our welfare state is missing some elements that tax the most vulnerable people. Climate change and the uncertain future of employment also generate more doubts. The increase of the inequality will condemn millions to structural poverty, denying children the equal opportunities when they are born. Many think that we have to bet for a more resilient and balanced model. It's the moment of a basic European basic income in Europe, the European basic income is a minimum income that each person in Europe, not each family, but each person would receive. And this European basic income has great advantages. It's benefiting more women, young people, and those who are working on paid labor. It would reach those that are socially marginalized, fighting against poverty. It protects us against exploitation and precarious work. And it's not reducing the search for employment, but it does reduce the anxiety or the fear about losing it. It's not just quality, it's a redistribution of wealth that empowers people, giving us greater safety, and it is a non-automatic protection against any crisis, increasing the resilience of our societies. Sounds good, doesn't it? But how is this going to be financed? First, through reform in personal income taxing the richest in our society, creating environmental taxes and taxing capital gains and land value. Basic income reduces bureaucracy and administrative costs, and we shouldn't reduce the resources having to do with basic services like education or healthcare systems. It may sound radical, but it's not unachievable. And to build sustainable and resilient societies, we have to explore new ideas. That's why the Green European Foundations launched a project to combat preconceived ideas while asking in Europe a debate about unconditional basic income. Add to this debate and share the message. Thank you.
Bueno, muy bien.
Well, good enough. I hope you liked it. With no further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Aina so that she can start and give us her opinion. Well, thank you for having invited me. It's such a pleasure to be here with Pepe and Philippe, and congratulate New Horizons Foundation because they are developing very necessary activities. Let me start with this topic. I think that basic income is just a proposal, and proposals on their own do not have to be good or bad on their own. They can be depending on the context where they are implemented, and this is where I would like to start with the context where we are standing and why it may or it may not be adequate to hear about this proposal. In our society, we live a crisis that is totally unknown. We don't know how important it is socially, economically, and in the labor market, deeply rooted with the crisis of 2017, oh, seven, I'm sorry. What is the answer that politicians gave? Sometimes this concept may be unfair, but the answer that was given is that at that time it was a crisis that had a financial origin at the time of totally incredible debt, where it was, where they asked the question, who was going to pay for the internal devaluation, who ultimately had to pay for all that debt? And the answer was overwhelming: workers. And well, we had a reduction in our welfare state, which currently we are still paying very visually, unfortunately, due to the COVID crisis. I think this crisis is totally different. We do not really know, as I said before, the importance of it, but definitely it is not a financial crisis. I would like to call it a transformation crisis. Transformational crisis just to find the point of optimism or a new horizon on how to approach it and how to work in political terms on this crisis. I call this transformational crisis because I don't think it's COVID, the origin of the crisis. COVID is an acceleration of it all. It's a transformational crisis that affects state administrations and all the other spheres of life protection systems, healthcare, and our school systems. This increases the transformations that were happening, and they increase the emergency of giving an answer to all of them. It's a crisis that I think we can say that we will not escape in the same initial point we started with it. We are going back to the year 2010, and we will not know the world as we knew it 2 years ago. It'll be a different world, and it'll depend on the answers we give, how this will be newly sketched. And I believe that the question is not who's going to pay for the crisis. This question will be answered depending on what our lives should be like. Who is going to lead transformation that will happen, and what are the interests of this transformation? And this question will be answered depending on who leads the crisis and what are the interests to lead the crisis. This affects all spheres. This is discussion happening in the European Union in the recent weeks and months. I think that we are all aware of the fact that we cannot respond in the same way as we did it in the year 2008. Even the European Central Bank is aware of this, even with the monetary policy. I think that Draghi, when he left, was very clear. We are all aware of the fact that we cannot answer in the same way, and this means that we have to add money. We have to eat money on an empty bucket. We're not going to recuperate this money. There cannot be any counterparts that affect so drastically the welfare state. And this means basically that it is impossible to approach this crisis without a fiscal reform that is at the level of the needs we have as a state, as a society, and as people. It is impossible. Well, countries are totally aware, the Netherlands, Luxembourg are totally aware of this fact. This is what we're talking about, doing or not doing, or not having a fiscal reform to answer the needs we have. And they're aware of the facts of the alternatives, and the proposal we are making is a new fiscality. And this leaves them without a business model. That's what they are defending on international. They have the fruits of the work of all Europe, and they defend their model of making business or doing business. And they are willing to agree or reach an agreement with the extreme right powers. And this is what we have at stake. If we connect it to our country, when we talk about this struggle, Unidas Podemos or En Comú Podem was able to correctly read the question or what we are dealing with. What are the interests that are leading this new transformation? And one of the answers in this case, or the proposals that the response or that offers an answer to in this framework is the minimum vital income. It tends to tries to give an answer, a different answer, different from what we had in the year 2008, and trying to sketch a framework and to determine who's chairing or leading this new transformation actively. And this will be probably the public administration and the state, and the active part will be a part of this necessary transformation, being co-responsible and trying to invest in the public space and in the private companies. When we talk about minimum vital income, beyond the specificity of it, I'm sure we could be very critical about it, and we had to be very critical because we have to be responsible considering what we are dealing with. When you talk about minimal vital income, we are speaking about freedom. Because if a person cannot guarantee paying rent or having food to eat in his or her fridge, they're not free to choose, free to move, free to do. So the minimal vital income has to be part of a free life and guaranteeing new rights, and not to just reduce or eliminate rights. This is a proposal that is born not only around social justice, but also about economic efficiency. It is necessary to maintain the capacity of consumption of people, and it tends to give an answer. And it is also a new way to understand that this is an expense, but it's rather an investment in social terms, so that no one lags behind, being able to reduce inequality. This should be the goal of any social policy. Having said this, if we say that this means freedom, guaranteeing rights and social justice, we should also say that the proposal we have on our tables is insufficient. It was born while being insufficient. It can be improved. The issue related to criteria that are quite locked and closed with respect to the profiles they are reaching is far from being a universal proposal, so that we can understand it with a scope wide enough as to reach to all people that need it. And I reckon that it is fair to say that this is a correct proposal in the correct framework, but the definition has to be improved because we are at a transformation crisis. We are in a welfare state, and therefore we are speaking about our social protection system. And I think that the question we had to ask as a society is that we do not currently deserve to continue speaking about little patches, little band-aids. This is what we do with political proposals. We are at a crisis that needs to be approached, and with the main question, what is the protection model we want for our society? And depending on this question, we will have to connect it to what money we need and what fiscal reform we need to do. And this, in parallel, leads us to reivindicate work as a concept and as an element that allows us to have access to further guarantees of rights as an active agent to defend citizens and to support citizens in all crises. Many people say, well, there's not we don't have a job. And this is one of the answers we find from the right wing. But also this has been an active answer, a very regular answer. We are also told that there is no work, that we are in a labor crisis, and in parallel, they are telling us that we have a huge deficit of healthcare staff, of doctors, nurses, the elderly care systems, but they say that we are lacking jobs. Well, we either need new staff, new teachers, or there's no work. So either one, but both at the same time cannot be possible. If you need new jobs, but you say that there are no jobs, well, there is a mismatch. We do not have a labor problem. The problem actually is that the jobs that society require are not supported by private investment, and they are not supported by public investment because they do not exist currently. And I think this is very important. That's why I would like to underscore this. The state, administrations, etc., have to accept a totally proactive attitude, and they have to lead this crisis around not a social answer, but it has to do with labor, with a more protagonist attitude with respect to this question. Why don't they do it? Why haven't they done this? Because of a dogmatism, they understood that the state didn't have to intervene in that economic strategy. This is totally an error. And secondly, resources. That's why let me finish with the second idea, which I think is fundamental. The necessary fiscal reform that we have to implement. We have 4 ideas, and this will be the end of my presentation. Firstly, what are the interests that lead this transformation? Secondly, the need of thinking more integrally when reforming our system of social protection. Integrally, not little patches, not single proposals, but integrally. Thirdly, labor. Well, having a fair and job that responds to the needs of people. And finally, but last but not least, fiscal reform, because basically without the fiscal reform, all the other proposals that we can put on our tables will just be dreams, wet dreams, as she says, that will only be dreams and not realities. That's why we have to find the money, what are the interests, and who's going to will have, and what is the leaders that we are going to head this transformation. Well, let me give the floor to the rest of our colleagues. Pepe, you have the floor.
Pues muchas gracias,
well, thank you,
Marc, y muchas gracias a la Green European Foundation y a Aina Vidal por organizar este acto y por invitarme a mí.
For having invited me.
Como decía, es un lujo estar con vosotros. Me
It's
hace mucha
fantastic to be
ilusión. A
here.
Philippe y a María los
I'm
conocía y
very
a Aina
happy
me hace mucha ilusión
to
conocerla, aunque sea
see
en
you all.
este
I knew
formato
Philippe and Mark, but
virtual
didn't know
de
Aina.
los
But
tiempos del
nice
COVID,
to
¿no?
meeting you, Aina.
Voy a intentar ligar, a ver, yo
try
tengo
to
una
connect
posición
to
un poco
what
aquí
was
complicada porque yo soy
I'm in a
politólogo,
position
estudioso de algunas cosas
which is quite
relacionadas con
complex. I'm a
esta, y luego
politologist
ahora tengo
and
una
I'm
ocupación,
a
trabajo en el
scholar,
Ministerio de
and I
Inclusión.
work in the
Una de
Ministry
las
of
cosas que hemos hecho
Inclusion.
ha sido poner en marcha este
In one of
ingreso
the
vital. No
things
voy a tratar,
that
no
we
voy a,
did
no voy a estar aquí jugando el papel de
is
defensor de lo que hemos
what
hecho ni de crítico de
we're
los
going to be
críticos,
speaking with.
sino
I'm
voy
not
a intentar
to
ponerme la gorra de
defend
politólogo y analizarlo con un poco de
what we have done
perspectiva
in our
y
political group, and I will try
también de
to use
análisis
my
crítico concreto, ¿no?
politologist hat
Y enlazarlo con esta pregunta tan
and
importante que
connect it
marca el
to
debate,
this
de en qué
question that
relación
we have.
tiene esta
What is the
propuesta,
relation
esta política
of
pública
this
concreta
public
con
policy
no
with
solo con la renta básica, sino con la filosofía, yo creo, que hay detrás de la propuesta de la renta básica. Lo primero, voy a hacer tres comentarios generales y sobre todo para ser breve y
general
para
comments to be brief
tiempo para el debate
and to leave some time for the debate, which is going to be very interesting, I think. The first thing is that
no sé con qué éxito,
I don't know how
pero
successfully,
nosotros cuando diseñamos
but when we design the minimum
lo que hay detrás del
vital
ingreso mínimo
income,
vital, trataba
we
de
tried
huir
to
un poco de este
escape
debate
from
del
this
que parte,
debate
que un poco impregna
that
la reflexión sobre la renta
permeates
básica
the
entre
considers
universalismo de las
about
políticas
basic
públicas
income
y
and the
focalización
universalism
de
of
las
public
políticas
policies
públicas,
and the
y ya digo que no sé con qué
compartmentalization
éxito y me
of
gustaría
public
saber vuestras
policies.
opiniones,
I would
pero
like to know your
la
opinions,
reflexión que
but
hacíamos
the
era
consideration we have
tenemos unas
in
restricciones
mind is that
fiscales,
we have
políticas de las que
fiscal,
luego hablaré un poco, con
political
las que tenemos que
restrictions that
operar,
we'll talk about, and we have to work with them,
y tenemos una voluntad
and we have
de
a will
responder a esta
to
demanda
answer
profunda
to this
básica a
deep
la que
basic demand
la propuesta de renta básica
that the
responde, que
proposal of
es
basic income
tenemos que
has
garantizar
to
un
answer
acceso
to.
mínimo a una
We
vida
have to guarantee
digna de forma universal a todos
minimum
los
access to a fair life
y entonces nuestra forma
to
de
all the
enfocar
people.
este
And
debate
our way
es
to approach this
no
debate
tenemos
is,
recursos
well, we do not have
políticos
political resources
ni fiscales para
or fiscal
hacer
resources
una
to
renta básica.
have
Es un
basic
debate, no
income.
es que todos los que estemos impulsando esto estemos convencidos de que la renta básica sea
Not
la solución a estos
all
problemas,
that
pero lo
we
que
are
sí
supporting
queremos
this are
es que
convinced
esta
that this is
política,
the
que sin duda es
universal solution, but
focalizada, que
definitely
trata de responder
this
a un problema de
policy
pobreza
that tries to
extrema
respond
endémico en España
an endemic
y
problem of
que
poverty in
las
Spain
políticas
and
autonómicas no estaban respondiendo
regional
con
policies were
suficiencia y las
not
políticas estatales
responding
no estaban respondiendo
to
con
this
suficiencia,
problem
con una
correctly.
filosofía de
We're trying
inclusividad,
to use a
de que sea una
philosophy of
política que aunque en el momento
inclusivity,
concreto,
of
por supuesto, va a
inclusiveness.
estar restringida en el acceso a
Obviously,
aquellos
this will
que
be
en el
restricted
mejor de los casos
to
posibles más la
those
necesitan,
people that need
sea
it
una
the
política
most.
con
This should be
ambición de ser
a
estructural y permanente en
policy
el tiempo para que en
that
un
should
mundo
be
donde los
structural in time, and
ciudadanos
in a world where
sufren
citizens suffer
shocks, están
shocks,
expuestos
they are
a
exposed
momentos
to
buenos, momentos
good
malos, fases
and
de
bad
expansión de sus
moments,
ingresos, fases
expansion phases of
de
their savings,
sufrimiento y de
and
caída de sus
stages
ingresos,
of
sepan que de
reduction
forma
of their savings. Well,
estructural,
they should know that
permanente, sólida, el
structurally and
Estado va a
permanently,
tener
so
una política
the
que les
state
va a
will have a
acompañar
policy
y
that
les
will
va a
support them,
sostener
will
en
help
esas fases de la
and
vida.
sustain them in
Entonces,
these
por
phases of their
eso digo, no
lives.
sé con qué éxito, pero la
So
filosofía ha sido
the
tratar de huir
philosophy has been to try to escape
de
from
este debate entre
this
universalismo y
debate
focalización,
between
proponiendo,
universalism and
lanzando una
focalization,
política que sin duda
proposing
es
and launching
focalizada
a
en el
policy
corto
which is
plazo, pero con
focalized
aspiración de ser
in the short
reconocida como
term, but
universal por
it
toda
should
la
be
ciudadanía,
recognized
como una
as a
política en la que
universal
todos nos podamos
policy, a
sentir
policy that
identificados y
we can
que
all feel
en algún
identified
momento
with,
podamos
so that
beneficiarnos de ella, ya no solo
at any
individualmente,
moment
sino
in time we can
colectivamente, la gente con la que vivimos, la
use it,
gente con la que trabajamos.
or people that
Entonces,
we
este ha
know
sido
can use
el
it. This is the first
punto, ¿no?
point that I
que me
wanted
gustaría
to
señalar. El
express.
segundo es
Secondly,
que yo creo que
I believe that
la puesta en marcha del ingreso
the
mínimo
implementation
vital
of minimum
marca,
vital
a mí me
income
gustaría, es verdad, es inevitable no
unavoidably
estar respondiendo al día a día y al corto plazo
should
que
not be
nos invaden
responding day after
en
day
nuestras
in a
preocupaciones
short-term basis
políticas y
to those
diarias, ¿no?
questions that have
Pero a mí me gusta
to do with
pensarlo
our
como
daily
un primer paso en
activities.
un
It
marco
should be
de
a first step
reorientar las
in a
políticas
way to
públicas
reorient
hacia
public
cosas que veníamos
policies
mucho tiempo
when facing
denunciando
things that we
y
had
de la cual la reflexión sobre la renta básica forma parte
complained
fundamental.
about
En
for
primer
many
lugar,
years. Firstly,
desligar el
we
apoyo
should
que el
disconnect
Estado da a los
the
individuos en
support
las
that the
diferentes
state
fases vitales
gives
que atraviesan
to people in their
del
different vital
desempeño del
stages,
mercado de trabajo. Esto es
considering the
un
performance of
sesgo
their labor market.
que
This is a
tienen la mayor
bias
parte de
that
los estados del
most
bienestar y en
welfare
particular
states
el nuestro. El
request,
hecho de que
and
todas
in
las
particular our
prestaciones, toda la
state,
capacidad del Estado
all
de
the
compensar, redistribuir,
benefits, the
proteger, tenía que estar
compensations for
vinculado pues, a
distribute,
los años que habías contribuido
distribution
como
and
trabajador para ver
compensation
cuánto te
have to be
corresponde de
connected
subsidio de desempleo, la
to all
cantidad de
those
las
years
pensiones
you have
depende de tus
worked. The
carreras
amount of your pensions
laborales,
depend on your
etcétera. Entonces,
labor
desligar la protección que el Estado
contribution, and
ofrece a
disconnect
los ciudadanos
this
del desempeño en el mercado de trabajo nos pareció un elemento importante
the
y
state
podemos
offers to
discutir, por supuesto,
citizens
de la
considering their
magnitud hasta
performance.
dónde hemos podido
Well,
llegar y
this
hasta
should
dónde no,
be
pero yo creo que es algo que
reconsidered.
es
I
muy
think, or
importante
revisited.
señalar.
This
Este
is very
cambio de mentalidad
important.
de
This
que
change in
el Estado
mentality
tiene
that
que hacer cosas
that the state
que
has to
desliguen
do things
el
that
grado de
disconnect
protección que
the
ofrece
degree of protection
del desempeño en el
offered
mercado de trabajo y de forma
by the
estructural, no de
state
forma,
from
digamos,
the performance in the labor
coyuntural
market.
ante una circunstancia
So
concreta.
this is
El segundo también
a
es
joint element that
incidir
connects with the
digamos, en la filosofía que
effect
impregna la norma, pero
of
también un poco en el
the philosophy that
diseño de algunas de
connects
sus
with the regulation
características,
and the
en la
design
idea de
of
que
the
nuestro objetivo no es
characteristics that
tanto,
so that
no es
our
solo,
goal
digamos,
is not
corregir un problema de
only
pobreza
to
extrema
correct
y
a
de
problem of
falta de
extreme
recursos de
poverty
los
and lack of
más
resources
vulnerables,
of the most vulnerable, but
sino
rather
de que nuestro objetivo último, en el fondo, es habilitar a todos los ciudadanos, darles los recursos para que puedan participar plenamente y de forma digna en la vida de la sociedad. Y esta capacitación de los ciudadanos para que puedan participar plenamente en la vida de la sociedad tiene una causa económica, y por eso el recurso que tenemos que poner sobre la mesa es una prestación económica, pero las vías de la participación plena en la sociedad no tienen por qué ser solo, por ejemplo, como tradicionalmente se ha entendido desde una parte de este debate, la activación en el mercado de trabajo, sino que tiene que ver con el acceso a formación, a un acceso más generoso, más adecuado a las necesidades de la gente en términos de sanidad, de cuidados, de educación, etc. Entonces yo creo que también ahí en la idea de los itinerarios de inclusión en los que proponemos incorporar a los beneficiarios de la prestación, hemos intentado salir de este también un poco debate perverso de que el único objetivo de estas prestaciones es incorporar a los ciudadanos en el mercado de trabajo. Y por supuesto hay una parte de la prestación que está orientado a activar en el mercado de trabajo a aquellos que están desempleados y sufren exclusión laboral, pero hay otra parte, la forma en que visualizamos estos itinerarios de inclusión que están en la norma no están centrados exclusivamente en esto, y que el objetivo final que persiguen es esta participación plena del individuo en la sociedad. Y esto yo creo que también podemos juzgar con qué grado de éxito la norma actual lo consigue, pero es una reflexión, yo creo, que viene de este debate sobre la renta básica y la necesidad de dignificar la vida de los ciudadanos con independencia de los vaivenes económicos que sufran coyunturalmente. Y luego la última cosa es que también estamos por una preocupación más, digamos, doméstica o europea, es una reorientación general de las prioridades de la intervención del Estado de las políticas públicas. Y es la reorientación hacia grupos que estaban sistemáticamente desatendidos, ¿no? En caso, la definición más digamos, concreta es que es una prestación muy focalizada por los requisitos de renta y patrimonio que cualifican para su acceso a los más vulnerables en términos económicos, pero sí tienen en cuenta pues, las diferentes realidades vitales en las que estos individuos viven, las composiciones de hogares, la monoparentalidad en una parte de ellos, la respuesta a un problema estructural de pobreza infantil que tenemos en España, y esto también, esta reorientación de preocupaciones, yo creo que también es respecto de la intervención de las políticas públicas, también tiene que ver con una reflexión de la propuesta de renta básica que tiene que ver con la insatisfacción de las políticas públicas para responder a los problemas de desigualdad y de acceso a las oportunidades en nuestras economías. Y la última reflexión, que a lo mejor es aquí donde puedo tratar, a lo mejor estas dos reflexiones las podía haber hecho antes digamos, hubiese encontrado pocas variaciones en estas dos reflexiones. Si las hubiese hecho antes de haber estado metido en el diseño de este mínimo vital, o de no haber participado en él, pero esta última a lo mejor está más contaminada por mi experiencia en estos meses, ¿no? Y esa es la cuestión de la viabilidad política de la propuesta, ¿no? Que Aina ha apuntado algunas de estas cuestiones, ¿no? Una, que esto también es una cuestión importante de debatir, yo he leído mucho y creo, mi experiencia ha cambiado un poco mi opinión hacia el siguiente punto, que es que mi percepción es que los problemas de gestión de las políticas públicas, que es uno de los argumentos centrales, no diría los más importantes, se enfatiza mucho a la hora de proponer la renta básica. Mi sensación es que es un argumento que a veces se exagera en exceso. Por dos motivos. En parte porque las políticas con ambición de ser universales tienden a ser más complejas de ser a la hora de ser implementadas y a la hora de ser gestionadas en el día a día de lo que a veces parece. Muchas veces en la experiencia del COVID hemos tenido muchas propuestas fuera de pues, lo que es el Estado, lo que debería dar es un cheque de 1.000 euros a todos los individuos, y el año que viene hacemos recuento y a quién le ha ido bien, quién le ha ido mal, y quién le ha ido bien lo devuelve, y quién le ha ido mal lo devuelve. Pensamos a políticas públicas que parecen muy sencillas al ser enunciadas, pero que a la hora de ponerlas en práctica con unos
things
cuerpos
that
administrativos,
are
con unas
going to
administraciones
be implemented
tributarias, con
with
una forma,
the administration,
digamos,
with
con unos
income
requisitos
tax
legales a
ministries,
la
with
hora de
legal
ser puestas en
requisites,
marcha, resultan mucho más
proved to
complicadas de lo que
be
estas
more
propuestas,
complex
digamos, sencillas en la
and
apariencia,
unreal
en realidad son.
than one would
Y la segunda
think,
es que también
because
los
they are
costes
very naive. And
administrativos de
also,
poner en marcha
the
políticas, digamos, con
implementing
requisitos
policies
de una
with
cierta complejidad,
a certain
a veces también
complexity
se exageran.
sometimes are also
Voy
exaggerated.
a poner, o sea, un
Let me
ejemplo que
just
no
give
tiene que
you
ver
an example that
directamente con esto,
doesn't
pero
have to do
durante
directly
la
with this, but
pandemia,
during the
el
pandemic,
gobierno,
the
una de las
government
políticas de
of
compensación,
Spain, one of
digamos, de
the
los costes
policies of
de la
compensation
pandemia fue a los trabajadores autónomos
was for
ofrecer una prestación,
the freelance workers, offering them a
digamos, básica
compensation, basic
a aquellos
compensation
que tuvieron que cerrar
to
sus
those that
negocios
had to
durante la
close
pandemia
their
o que sufrieron una
businesses
fuerte caída
down
de ingresos. Y
during
hubo
the
un
pandemic, or that
debate
had a
en
great
parte de
reduction of
los
income.
autónomos de si esta prestación debería ser
And the
universal a todos
debate
los autónomos, como
was,
lo ha sido en
should
algunos
this be a
países,
universal
o
thing,
como lo
or
hicimos nosotros,
as we
que
did
fue
here,
relativamente generosa en el acceso, pero no
was
universal. Al final, en esta
something
prestación
not
no va a entrar en
universal,
debate
but
sobre
quite
sí
generous.
las bondades y méritos de cada una de las propuestas, pero esta
So
prestación
this
accedió
compensation
prácticamente la mitad de los autónomos
was offered to
de
nearly
España.
half, or nearly half of
Hubo
the
unos ciertos requisitos
freelancers
de
in Spain
ingresos
had
o
access to
de
it.
sectores
There
en
were
los que
some
la pandemia, bien,
prerequisites
por
in the
razones
area, in different
objetivas, había
areas,
pasado
in the
más
different
daño. Y
professional
esta
areas
cualificación
that
para
led
nada
some
causó
to
una
have access
complejidad en la gestión
to
de
it,
esta
but
prestación, ¿no?
this did not
Y mi sensación, de
mean
nuevo, en
a
el
huge
caso
complexity in the
del ingreso
implementation
mínimo vital es
or
algo más
many
complejo, porque sí es verdad que podemos
complaints.
decir que parte de los
In fact,
requisitos y la
part of the requisites
documentación
and
y
the
lo
documents
riguroso que está siendo
required and how
el INS a la hora
rigorous
de comprobar
the
los datos y que
ministries
por la
being when
naturaleza de la
checking the
norma
data, and because
está
of the
llevando a lo
nature
mejor
of
a
this
una
regulation, maybe this is
cierta
generating
cadencia, a lo
a
mejor
certain
más lenta de lo que algunos podían esperar, pero en el
pace
fondo
that
yo
is
creo que
slower
son
than expected.
cuestiones que en el medio y
I
largo
believe that
plazo se
in
van a
the
disipar. Cuando uno
mid-long term
mira
basis,
en
these issues will
perspectiva
be
cómo se
just
están resolviendo y
merged
cuánta gente está
into the background
accediendo
to see how
en
many
estas
people are having
circunstancias y con
access
el poco margen de tiempo que llevamos,
to
pues yo
these
mi sensación,
benefits.
mi convencimiento es que la
And
lectura que se haga
the reading
del
we
ingreso mínimo
do
vital
of this minimum
no va a
vital
ser peor que la
income
de
shouldn't
muchas de
be
las prestaciones, sino
worse
va a ser bastante
than many
mejor
of the
de la
compensations. It
de
will
muchas
actually
prestaciones
be
similares hemos
better
visto en el pasado.
than
Las buenas
many
prestaciones, incluso en el contexto
of
español, que sabemos que
the
han funcionado bien,
compensations that
han
we have
necesitado
had
un
in
tiempo
Spain and
de
that worked
rodaje
well.
para que funcionen y esto es un poco parte de la naturaleza del problema. Y es
This
que
is
la
part of
simplificación de los trámites
the
a
benefits that
veces
we get.
esconde, me parece que
Sometimes
son argumentos, digamos, que se exageran.
the devil is in the details
El
here.
segundo aspecto en esta
The
cuestión de la
second
viabilidad
aspect
política
in the
es
political
el apoyo en
feasibility
la opinión pública
is the support
del que necesitan estas
of
políticas, ¿no? Y aquí hay
public
dos enfoques. Una
opinion.
es, y yo tiendo a pensar
I
que
tend to
uno
think
es, hay que lanzar
that
propuestas y estas propuestas una vez en
we
marcha
have to generate
generarán el
proposals
apoyo
and they
social
will generate
que las
a
haga
wave of
permanentes en el
social
tiempo, y
support
esto
that
es una
make them
posibilidad.
permanent in time. This is a
Otro
possibility.
camino es
Another way
asegurarnos,
is to
ir
ensure,
despacio,
make sure
asegurando que el
that
apoyo
the
a estas
support we
políticas
get to
es,
these policies
si no digamos unánime, sí
is, if
suficientemente
not
grande para
unanimous, it's
que no se
big
cuestione
enough
su permanencia en el
so that
tiempo, ¿no?
their
Y
continuity in time is
yo
not questioned.
no tengo una posición muy
Well, I
clara en
don't
este
have a very clear
debate. Creo que
position in this debate.
hay razones para pensar que los dos
No,
argumentos
there are
son válidos,
positions to
pero
lead
mi
us to think that
sensación
both
es que
arguments
viendo
are
el
valid, but
contexto en el que nos operamos,
in a
los argumentos en
context
los que se lanzan, la polarización
we live in
partidista en la que
where we see
vivimos,
the
es
party
importante no
polarization,
descuidar
the
este
political party
aspecto
polarization,
de
we shouldn't
conseguir
forget
amplias
the
coaliciones, ya no
issue
digo en términos de
achieving
partidos, en
great
términos de mayorías
coalitions, not in terms
parlamentarias, sino en términos de apoyo social
parties,
a las
but
propuestas que
social
las
support to
hagan
the
en cierto
proposals
sentido
that
irrevertibles,
make
¿no? Y a mí esto me
them
parece importante. A lo mejor
unchangeable.
eso nos causa algunas frustraciones en
This
cuanto
may
de
lead us
rápido,
to some
en cuanto de
levels of frustration,
ambiciosos algunas políticas son,
depending on how
pero si
ambitious
conseguimos
our
políticas
policies are.
que
But if we
gocen de un cierto grado de
generate
consenso, que cambien las prioridades
policies
y que
that
operen con una filosofía
also
diferente de las del
include
pasado
a big
y
degree of
que sean
consensus,
en cierto
as we could see in the
sentido
past, and that are
irreversibles, a mí eso me
unchangeable
parece
or
un
irreversible,
argumento muy
I believe
importante
this would
que
be a very
no
important
deberíamos despreciar.
argument
Sobre
that
todo si
we should
pensamos
not forget
más en
about.
el largo
Mainly if
plazo
we
y
think
en
about
el
the
corto
long
plazo,
term
en cómo será
versus the
el
short term,
modelo de
how
bienestar
the welfare
de las sociedades
model will
europeas
be in the
dentro
European
de 10,
societies
20
in 10,
años,
20 years'
más que
time
cómo tendremos
versus
la
how
renta de ciudadanía en Italia,
the income,
el ingreso mínimo
the
vital en
citizen
España
income
operando
will
de
be
aquí a
in
los
Italy or
próximos
in Spain
6 meses.
in the coming
Y la
6
última es
months.
este tema de la
And the
fiscalidad
final element, which is
en el que Aina ha insistido
fiscality,
mucho, que es, yo
Aina
creo, central, ¿no?
talked about
Que tiene que ver, por
this,
supuesto, con
and
cuánto de
it's a key
popular y
element.
cuánta oposición podemos
How
esperar a
much
este tipo de
opposition
propuestas,
can we
pero yo creo
expect
que
from these initiatives.
una transformación, ya no digo de la adopción plenamente de una renta básica, pero una adopción de políticas públicas
or the acceptance of new policies
de
that
los
are
principios en los que hablábamos antes,
addressed to
requieren un cambio de fiscalidad,
problems that
sobre todo si queremos
we're
ser
talking about require
ambiciosos. Y yo
a
creo que
change in the
aquí
fiscality. I
hay
think
buenas noticias y
that we
malas
have good
noticias.
news and bad news.
Malas noticias.
Bad news.
Ahora yo creo que es un momento complicado
Now is
para promover
difficult
grandes
moment to
reformas
promote
fiscales que
big
puedan,
fiscal reforms that
digamos,
can
incidir en el bolsillo
have
de
an
muchos
effect in the
ciudadanos, sobre
pocket
todo
of
pensando en
many
la viabilidad
citizens,
futura
mainly
de las políticas.
thinking about the
Pero buenas
feasibility of
noticias
these
pensando
new
yo creo
proposals. But it's
en
also
el
good news
panorama
when we
general.
think about the
Hay
general
evidencia de
panorama
encuestas
or sphere.
en la que
There are
la
some proposals where
propensión de la
the
ciudadanía
trend of
a contribuir
citizenship to
fiscalmente a un
fiscally
Estado
contribute
más
towards
generoso, más
a more
ambicioso, con más
generous, more
capacidad de
ambitious
proteger
state
el
with
bienestar de
more
los
capacity to
ciudadanos en
protect the
sanidad, en
welfare
educación,
of
en
citizens,
ingresos,
education,
es mayor
healthcare, etc., is
ahora que lo
greater
que era
now
antes de la
than
pandemia.
it was
Y
before the
esto va en la
pandemic.
línea de lo que
And
sabemos, hay
this
mucha literatura
follows the
sobre
line
cómo
of
estas grandes crisis que
literature,
generan
how
un cierto sentido de
crises that generate
incertidumbre
a certain degree of
y
uncertainty,
de no solo de incertidumbre
and
generalizada, sino también algo que es
generalized
importante antes
uncertainty, and
oía,
something
sino
which is very important,
injusticia por lo
and also a certain level of
asimétrico del impacto de
injustice
la crisis en unos
because
colectivos frente
of
a
the
otros,
asymmetry of
genera un
our
sentimiento
crisis,
de tolerancia
of
hacia la
some sectors
fiscalidad
versus others,
que en otros
generates an
momentos no
attitude
teníamos.
towards fiscality that
Y esto yo
before
creo
we
que sí
didn't
que es
have. And I
importante
think
porque
this is important
si
because
mi explicación preferida
if
de
my
por qué de los
favorite
años
explanation
80,
of
a
why
partir
in
de
the
los años 80 hemos
80s
observado
we have observed
digamos, movimiento de ciertas
certain
políticas
movements of
económicas
certain
hacia la
economic
derecha,
policies
muchas
towards
veces
the right,
tendemos a privilegiar las
is
explicaciones
because
del
sometimes
lado
we
de la
privilege the
oferta, por así
explanations
decirlo, de
of
que han
the
aparecido
offer.
políticos que han aparecido con
Some
mensajes, digamos,
politicians showed up with
de derecha, o que la
messages
globalización
that,
ha
led towards the
fortalecido
right,
en la capacidad de
or
influencia de determinados lobbies o
that
determinados
certain
sectores.
lobbying
Sin
activities
desmerecer estas
were stronger than
explicaciones,
others.
yo creo que
But I think that
una explicación muy importante de
a
por
very important
qué
explanation
en las últimas
of
décadas del
why in the
siglo XX hemos
latest
observado una
decades of
cierta
the 20th
derechización de
century,
las políticas
we've seen
públicas es que la opinión
a
pública
new
en cierto
trend
sentido
towards the
se ha
change
derechizado, sobre todo en
of
la
the public
dimensión
opinion,
de la
because public
fiscalidad.
opinion has
Esta sensación
gone
de que
towards
los
the right
impuestos
when
van a
speaking
beneficiar a
about
la gente que no es como
fiscality.
yo,
Taxes is going
que
to
el Estado
benefit
es
people
una
that
caja
is
negra
not like
donde yo no
me.
sé muy
The
bien,
state is a black box where I do
por dónde
not
entran los
really
impuestos,
know
pero no sé
where
por cómo salen
taxes
los
come
gastos.
into, but
Ha sido un
I do
argumento
know how they come into, but
muy
I don't know
poderoso.
the
Y el
exit,
hecho de que podamos ofrecer primero políticas en las que los
the
ciudadanos se
exit door.
reconozcan como
And
potenciales
citizens should
beneficiarios y no
see
ahora en el
themselves as
futuro,
potential beneficiaries,
y
if not now,
que
well, in the
sucesos como
future,
la pandemia
and that
puedan
elements
cambiar la
such as the
perspectiva de
pandemic
los
can change the
ciudadanos de
perspective of
cómo la
citizens
capacidad del Estado
and
de
how the
proteger
capacity of the
no
state
puede
to
ser
protect
comparada con
cannot
las
be
de otros
compared
mecanismos del mercado
to
para
other
proteger
mechanisms
a
that
individuos vulnerables,
the
puede
market
estar
has. Well, this is something that may
cambiando
be
esto. O sea que
changing
yo creo que hay un
some
espacio de
attitudes. There's
oportunidad
a
en muchas de
space
las
of
cosas que decía
opportunity
Aina
in many of the things that Aina
lo
just
dejo aquí
said.
para,
And let me leave it here
creo que he tardado más de lo que
because
quería,
I think I spoke more than I was
seguro
supposed
que
to.
Philippe tiene
But I'm
cosas
sure that
más
Philippe
interesantes que
has
decir.
many interesting things to say. Thank you. Thank you, Pepe. Philippe, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation first, which enables me to understand better both the content and the motivation behind the Ingreso Mínimo Vital. I was asked to answer a number of questions, which I'll do very briefly. The first one is, what's the difference between the Renda Bàsica? What are the crucial differences between the Renda Bàsica and the Ingreso Mínimo Vital? Secondly, why do people defend basic income against the existing types of guaranteed minimum income? Thirdly, could I say something about the most recent or ongoing experiments about basic income and what can we learn from them? And finally, is the Ingreso Mínimo Vital a step towards the basic income? Okay, very quickly. So first, what are the key differences? There are three. A basic income is first strictly individual, which means that how much you get it and whether you get it is independent of your household situation. If you have a basic income, you go and live with someone in the same situation as you, the level of your basic income is not reduced. If you go and live with someone who has his or her own income from work, you still receive your basic income. Under the existing schemes, including the Ingreso Mínimo Vital, this is not the case. One takes into account the household situation, and the same holds for all the existing similar schemes like the Revenu de Solidarité Active, which is the name given more recently to the French Revenu Minimum d'Insertion. It's also the case for so-called Hartz IV in Germany. It's the case for the Reddito di Cittadinanza in Italy and other schemes elsewhere. They are not strictly individual, they are household-based. Second difference, basic income is not means-tested, which means that you receive it whether you are rich or poor. The level of the basic income, the right to the basic income is not modified, the right is not abolished if you earn an income from your work. Does that mean that it makes the rich people richer? Of course not, because the rich people will have to pay in some way for their own basic income, and indeed for the basic income of a number of people who are not as rich as they are. That's the second key difference. Of course, the Reddito Mínimo Vital, like the other schemes, are schemes that are targeted at the poorer parts of the population. And so they are focused on people because of the lack of an income or because of an insufficient income from other sources. Like all the social assistance systems have been ever since they were first invented at the beginning of the 16th century. And thirdly, the third difference is that the basic income is obligation-free. That is, there is no work requirement. You are not, as a counterpart for getting the income, you are not supposed to be available on the labor market. If you have a job and give it up, you are still entitled to a basic income. You have it when you work, you have it when you give up voluntarily a job. So these are the three key differences between what has now been called ever since this little network, initially now a worldwide network beyond the basic income, first European network, now Earth Network. So that's how basic income was defined by them. So from the 1980s onward, and it's the definition that was then taken up worldwide today. And so three key elements, which makes it unconditional in those senses. So strictly individual, universal in the sense of not means tested, and obligation free in the sense of not submitted to conditions of participation in the labor market. Two, why do people defend it? Well, of course, for a large number of reasons, but I'll just give two, which may be particularly relevant for a red-green encounter like this evening. In a way, the most radical way of justifying it was already encapsulated in the title of an article I published in the 1980s, and that was then translated, including with a number of comments on it by Zona Abierta. I don't know whether it's a journal that still exists, but so it's a left-wing sort of academic political journal, and the title was A Capitalist Road to Communism. And so one radical way of defending a basic income consists in saying, well, let's just be loyal to this fundamental objective that Karl Marx shared with the so-called utopian socialists. And what was that? It was communism, understood not as the collective ownership of the means of production, but understood as a society in which people contribute according to their capacities, voluntarily, without being paid for it, while at the same time they receive according to their needs, without needing to pay for it. And so, as a basic income grows relative to GDP per capita in a society, you could say that people in that society will contribute more and more, not because they are forced to, because they have an unconditional basic income, but because work has been transformed in such a way that it has become attractive enough. Attractive because of the quality of the human relations in that job, or because the intrinsic interest of the job, or because of the feeling that this job is being useful. And at the same time, an increasing part of the social product is being distributed according to needs. So because the basic needs, some basic needs shared by everyone, are being covered by this basic income. And so from this point of view, you say, well, what we need to fight for is a society in which it will be possible, as Marx put it, to write on our banners from each according to his or her capacities, to each according to his or her needs. And in order to get that, you need this unconditional income, which at the same time gives people the bargaining power that enables them to refuse shitty jobs, but at the same time doesn't trap them in a situation of unemployment of exclusion, because they can combine that basic income with jobs, including poorly paid jobs, but jobs that are attractive in themselves because they correspond to their real vocation, because they give them the sort of training which they will need in order to get more interesting or better rewarded jobs. So that's one way, I think, which is present to some extent. I still had yesterday an interesting discussion with a group of Italians, more or less based in Bologna, who call themselves accelerationists, and they defend the idea that we should promote technical change because technical change, if it's an intelligent sort of technical change, will enable us to reach this situation of abundance, of course, with frugal needs, frugal desires, not consumerism, that will make it possible to organize society in this way, with people no longer obliged to work, and yet be no longer obliged to work because they have enough to satisfy their needs, and nevertheless have something sustainable of that sort. So that's one way, you could say, sort of a radical left way of seeing basic income, of course, deeply heretical, because it says, well, let's use the powerful dynamics of capitalism, which Marx described so well, rather than believing that the collective ownership of the means of production, as experimented in various ways in a number of places in the world, including a few remaining ones today, rather than believing that would enable us to reach that situation of abundance. And then there is another way of, another among several, but I think a very important way of defending the idea of basic income, which you could call the green way, or one of the green ways of defending it. And that's encapsulated in the subtitle of the book I published with one of my colleagues a couple of years ago with Harvard University Press, and has been published in Spanish also in Mexico, under the title Ingrés Básico, and the subtitle was A Radical Proposal for a Free Society and a Sane Economy. And what is a sane economy? It's an economy that doesn't destroy the people and that doesn't destroy the planet. And why? I mean, of course, basic income is not the only instrument we need to do that, but it is a central instrument for that purpose. Why? Because, and that was the case from the 1980s, and the standard answer from the left and from the right at the time, faced with massive unemployment, in particular youth unemployment, was growth, growth, growth. Because growth would generate jobs, and jobs is what we need in order to fight unemployment and to fight poverty. But of course, even in the 1980s, a number of people thought, a decade after the alarm alarmed appeal of the Club of Rome thought, well, growth, 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 this is not going to lead us to anything sustainable, anything desirable. We need to find another way of addressing mass unemployment. And why not give people an unconditional income so that they can reduce their working time voluntarily, so that they can interrupt their career in such a way that other people will be able to access these jobs, rather than just believe that growth, we need more and more jobs, and in order to get more and more jobs, we need more and more growth. So basic income was proposed from that time, and still today, as a way of addressing the problem of involuntary unemployment, partly by creating voluntary unemployment, that is, enabling people to work part-time or to give up looking for a job completely for a period, thanks to the unconditionality of this basic income. So that was the way in which one could address the problem of unemployment without destroying the planet. And of course, this was also a way of avoiding the destruction of the people, because a number of people in our societies work too much. They are sick because they work too much. And so these people would be given the opportunity to work less, and because of the obligation-free nature of basic income. But at the same time, other people who are sick because they cannot get to a job, and the job for most of us, indeed for all of us to some extent, a sort of paid participation in the economy is an important part of what we want in life. Well, some people don't have access to that. Well, these people, thanks to a basic income, get access to that, partly because the basic income is then a sort of flexible, intelligent way of sharing the existing employment, but also because it operates as a subsidy for a job, but a subsidy for a job that is chosen. It's very different from a wage subsidy, which gives the bargaining power to the employer, says it's the potential employee who can decide whether the job is a shitty job, or on the contrary, a job that is worth taking, even if it's badly paid or irregularly paid, self-employed, or an internship, etc. So these are two of the ways in which basic income is being defended today. And so one says, well, we need this mobilizing utopia of a society that will not be geared by profit or sort of totally controlled by a powerful state. We need some society in which people will contribute voluntarily according to their capacities and receive according to their needs. It's in fact the communism of Wikipedia, right? That's what we do with Wikipedia. We contribute according to our knowledge, and we take out of it according to our needs. Well, Wikipedia is a fantastic utopia, communist utopia at the heart of cognitive capitalism. Well, so one justification is to say, well, let's do that, but not just in this little segment of our social and economic life, that's Wikipedia, but throughout society. And the other justification, green justification, says, well, let's have a sane economy, one that doesn't destroy the people and doesn't destroy the planet. And for that, you need this combination of universality, and the fact that you can combine the benefit with work, and obligation freeness, in the sense that you can give up jobs that you regard as lousy jobs, as bullshit jobs, or whatever. So these are two of the justifications. Of course, I take each of them is affected by a number of, can be formulated in a new way, because of the climate crisis, because of the corona crisis, because of automation. But in fact, there are really two of the models which sort of structure the arguments in favor of basic income. Thirdly, just a word then about some of about the experiments. Let's first say that many of the experiments or pilots or whatever are simply irrelevant to so-called basic income experiments are simply irrelevant to our situation in a country like Spain or Germany or Belgium or France, whatever, because they are done in countries, in less developed countries, where there is no, or practically no social protection, sometimes only for the handicapped or for the elderly. And then a basic income is, most of the effects of a basic income is simply the same sort of effect that a means-tested guaranteed minimum income system would have. You just take people out of extreme poverty, so the experiments in India or in Kenya now are of that sort. And trying to draw inferences about saying, look how good basic income would be from those experiments is not serious, because you could use exactly the same experiments to say what we need is something like a conditional guaranteed minimum income, something focused at the poor. But there are some experiments that are more relevant to us. The main one being the Finnish experiment conducted in Finland between the 1st of January 2017 and the 31st of December 2018, and of which we only got the full results 3 months ago or so. And then there is, I was asked to say something about that, there's a German an experiment about to be started with quite a bit of publicity around it in Germany. The most serious experiment by far in methodological terms of all those conducted in developed countries is the Finnish experiment. But it is very, very narrow, because it is, you could say it's a real experiment about basic income, but the sample consists exclusively of people who are long-term unemployed. Most of these people have never worked. All these people were entitled before to the existing scheme, which 560 euros per person and per month, which is similar to the existing scheme in Finland, which you could say is roughly analogous to the Ingrés Minimo Vital. So it exists, it has been existing in Finland for quite a while. People were entitled to that, but it was conditional in the 3 senses I mentioned: household-based, means-tested, only to the poor, and obligation. It had the obligation to be available on the labor market. What the Finnish government then decided to experiment is, okay, let's take a random sample of those people and tell them you get the same amount, but unconditionally. 3 conditions were lifted. And what did we see? Well, what we saw is that there was a statistically significant difference, and because it's experimental with everything controlled, you can say it's a causal relationship. So there was a statistically significant difference in terms of the stress experimented by the people, reduction in stress and reduction in health problem as reported subjectively. Was there a difference in terms of employment? There was no significant difference in the first year of the experiment, but there was a positive effect of the unconditionality in the second year of the experiment, but only for the immigrant people. For the native Finnish people, there was no significant effect. There was a little effect, but not statistically significant, but a very significant impact on these people. So these results are interesting. Do they help us to determine whether a basic income, unconditional basic income at that level is sustainable? Of course not. Of course not. Because these are only long-term unemployed people. Of course, in order to determine what is sustainable and not, you need to also give a basic income to people who currently work. And of course, if some of them decide to work part-time, that's perfectly fine. It's part of the purpose. If some want to interrupt work, it's also part of the purpose. But if too many of them do it, of course, the system will not be financially sustainable. So these experiments will not give an answer to that question. What about the German experiment that's now starting? It's a bit of a strange experiment because it's not publicly funded. It's funded by voluntary donations. The aim is to have 120 people taking part in the experiment with a control group out of people who have to volunteer to be part of the experiment. Of course, this experiment will not have the limitation of being restricted to long-term unemployed people. There will be a wide variety of people, but it has the major limitation of being restricted in the sample only to volunteers. It's people who have, for some reason, a special interest in trying to have this amount of money in order to be able to do what they wish to do in them. So it's really, it won't be a random sample of the population. That massively limits what you can infer from it. Moreover, of course, it shares the other limitations. It's only for 2 years. Of course, if you get that for 2 years, it's very different from getting something for life. It has and suffers from the so-called Hawthorne effect, which is the fact that most of the effect that will be observed, or much of the effect that will be observed, will be simply due to the fact that people are in an experiment and they know they are being watched, rather than what would happen if everyone in society got that same amount. And there is then the massive limitation related, which exists also in the Finnish experiment, but is even bigger here, which is that people receive here 1,200 euros in addition to whatever income they have. And whatever income they have is being taxed in the usual way, which means they still get a tax exemption on the first part of their income like everyone else. And of course, this is totally unfeasible if you scale it up. If you give a basic income to everyone in society, of course, you'll have to have a massive, an important fiscal reform, which will replace this tax exemption on the lower parts of everyone's income by the basic income. So for all these reasons, let's not be too excited about these experiments. And this holds also for other experiments on a smaller scale, including that are being done in Spain, except that each of these experiments is fantastic for the sake of publicity for the idea of basic income. And it forces people to reflect on it, to say, well, maybe it's not so stupid. Does it have? Then you discovered some strange things, interesting things, like the fact that it has a more positive effect on the immigrants among the long-term unemployed than among the natives. So it may teach you a number of things, but above all, it's an opportunity for more people to hear about the idea, to start thinking about the idea. And of course, an idea can only come about in a democratic society if enough people have had the opportunity to think about it. So finally, and very shortly, in the light of all this is the Ingreso Mínimo Vital introduced in Spain, step in the direction of basic income. Absolutely, absolutely. And in my view, an essential step for two reasons. And one is that it's covering, of course, as a basic income would need to do, it's pulling out of poverty a large number of people. And of course, if you have in place a minimum scheme of this sort, and both the financial feasibility, the political feasibility, the administrative feasibility of a basic income is greatly increased. Second reason why I think it's important is that it is done at the level that may not please everyone in Catalonia, but because it's done at the Spanish level, the level of the whole of the country. A basic income is, of course, economically more stable, not necessarily politically more feasible, but economically more stable if it is done on a larger scale when you have space where people can move freely, both the contributors and the beneficiaries of the scheme. So doing it in a homogeneous way at the level of a larger entity is, if it is possible, politically feasible, it's better. Hence also in the little video at the beginning, there's a plea for an EU-wide basic income. Yes, why not? But we are really far from that. So my answer to the title question of this little encounter is definitely yes. It's important to go in that direction. We won't leap, certainly not to a full basic income. We won't jump to it in one go. And introducing it as was done in this case, and I'm happy that there was such unanimity also in the Cortes in favor of the proposal, as there was when the RMI was introduced in the Assemblée Nationale in the 1980s under Rocard. So it's very important, and I'm very happy that, Spain is making this step.
Pues,
well, awesome. I'd like to thank the three of you for your interventions. We could use the last few minutes that I will ask a question to each one of you, maybe see if you would like to add something. Let me ask one question to each one of you, but you can answer freely. On the one hand, I would like to ask, I'm sorry, Mark, but you've been muted. We cannot hear you.
Mark.
Ahora sí.
Now it's working. Why? Sorry, he says.
Ahora podemos responder lo que queremos.
Why did you decide that there were 12 months? There should be a minimum of 12 months of tax payment to have access to this minimum vital income. And what Philippe said is that there was a very strong criticism in terms of parliamentary noise, but when a votation was required, there was a very high percentage. Because one thing is the noise, the background noise, and the other we'll see how some of these structural measures are consolidated. And you talked about the feasibility. This is something that is not less important towards new and future debates. And connected to the last things, you know that you're in the Congress, Aina, and one thing is what you see on TV, and then in the commissions when votes are required, you don't really see where victories or defeats exist, because laws can be explained, but they have to be voted. And Philippe, I'd like to ask, well, there's a question. If you had basic income, who would be doing the non-desired or the non-desirable jobs? Because those people that could receive the basic income would probably decide not to do these jobs. It should be in the hands of the technological improvements. Or where is that precarious type of jobs, or the precarious type of jobs, hard to do jobs that are usually done by people that come from other countries, by immigrants? I would leave it here. I'm sorry, because there are some people that ask questions, interesting questions. Some people just defend the virtues of basic income, period. But maybe could you be more specific to these questions and maybe add a final comment? We have 10 minutes ahead of us. Could we start with this by the same order? Aina, answering your question. Now, sure. Yes. Curiously, in Spain, there was a unanimity in the approval of minimum vital income, but it doesn't respond to the opinion of the majority of the parties of the parliamentary spectrum. Well, Pepe said that the social support protected from the initiatives, and the situation of crisis that we are living made it really impossible that the right wing could stay away from the votation. This doesn't mean that they are totally against this minimum vital income, and they will use all the tools they have in their hands, and they have many, to try to torpedo this proposal and all that has to do with it. And I don't have a shade of a doubt the right wing of this country is not reasonable, is not going towards the right. It doesn't see the light, doesn't realize that we people need social protection. But they think that are close to the ultra-fascist legacy also in the area of social protection. And unfortunately, when you want to know that there are some things that need to be reviewed, you have to see what Vox has to say, extreme right, what Vox has to say about the social protection. And they called it something pitiful. People, they say, are lazy, they don't have an intention to work, and they prefer to be saved by father state, and there's no real situation of vulnerability. That's what they said, that this is the kind of debate that they tried to introduce, but it failed, thanks to what Pepe said, the social protection. I wouldn't really feel honest if I didn't ask a question. I don't believe we have to disconnect social protection from labor. I don't think this is the real answer to the social needs. I think that this is what we are trying to solve, and the common denominator of all those of us who are here believe that inequality is an unsustainable problem, an acceptable problem, and we're trying to find the best possible solutions to give an answer to the needs of people. I think that we are all in this, but the fact is that we have to get the right answer. Disconnecting the social protection of work will shed light to the darkest areas, then shed light to the light. How to incentivize job creation if we don't need to work? Why should we work? This question is something that needs to be answered. I say that because if we are aware of the fact that social support is protecting some proposals, also the social proof can also negatively affect other proposals. And this has to do with fiscality. There is a public opinion that goes against the taxing strategies, as Pepe said, because I think there is an element that they didn't mention that is very important, is that the social contract is destroyed in our country. And what does that mean? It means that young people in Spain do not believe that they will have a retirement or a pension. And this is a fracture. And I don't think that by adding more questions in the labor sphere, we can answer the questions of the social contract. And I doubt that eliminating the centrality of work can help in the new building of a social contract. But on the other hand, I do believe that there are some facts that can help and support newer and more positive strategies. The fact of not denying to go against precariousness in the labor market directly will contribute to give a greater stability. And secondly, I believe that we shouldn't accept the elimination of job creation, because work will continue existing. The problem is that not that we don't have a job. Well, the labor market is offering jobs that are not in line with the needs we have. And the question that we should answer is that if we are willing to accept that the administrations and the state enter in this game and participate actively, without just saying, well, let's wait and see, and to see if the private market will answer the society's needs. One of the answers is that the private labor market will not participate and will not give an answer to many of the needs that we have as a society. And my proposal is, well, let's participate as a state, let's participate with the public administrations in the development of these needs. Who otherwise will take care of jobs that, well, not that will disappear, but that we need to increase and to implement. Who's going to do certain jobs? Initially, many people think that the state will. And secondly, and connected to this, I think that any proposal that we make, if it is a serious proposal, if it has to do with the building of a new social contract, it has to respond not only to particular interests, but to public interests. Amongst other things, we have to go through a social and fiscal reform. And with this fiscal reform, resources are not endless. Governments have to wonder how to correctly administrate these public resources. And I think that this has to do with respect to collective interests that we all have in mind. We have many needs. and we had to prioritize things. And one of them is that I believe that in the area of gender, we have many more needs than basic income cannot on its own answer. But there should be other instruments from public administration that respond to the gaps we have in the sphere of gender. When, for example, we reach retirement age, and that respond to a welfare state that can generate answers visibly. It's not enough to do this with the basic income because we still need other instruments that need to be used. And that, well, and that's it. Insisting on the fact that we need a social contract, a consensus, and a support that protects political proposals. And let me insist on the fiscal reform issue. Thank you. Pepe,
sí, muy breve.
Very briefly.
Creo que deberíamos, os animo a organizar otro debate sobre el papel del trabajo y la centralidad del trabajo en este debate de la renta básica. Que yo mismo tengo muchas dudas e incertidumbres y tiendo a compartir muchos de los argumentos a un lado y a otro del debate. ¿Qué parte del trabajo es central para asegurar una vida digna? Y si no es central o si lo es, y si lo es, ¿en qué medida, cuánta es la capacidad de esta renta básica de, al eliminar los trabajos que no proporcionan dignidad a los individuos, garantizar que los trabajos disponibles son trabajos aceptables, ya sean a tiempo parcial, pero placenteros y, digamos, que realicen a la persona, ¿no? Y es un debate, también es un debate que tiene que ver con la viabilidad política. Es una segunda derivada, pero yo creo que importante. Una de las cosas, yo creo que me hace pensar que el trabajo es más importante de lo que creemos en los debates de la renta básica, es que para que los individuos perciban que este marco de políticas públicas va a ser estable y permanente en el tiempo y lo necesita para que la renta básica ejerza sus efectos liberadores, ha de ser así, los individuos tienen que percibir que el papel que juegan en la sociedad les da una capacidad de negociación y de poder frente a otros agentes que hay en la sociedad. Y el trabajo cumplía un poco este papel. Yo la construcción de los estados del bienestar en parte tenía que ver con el empoderamiento político de un sector de la sociedad que sabía que el papel que jugaba en la economía era clave para que la economía funcionara. Y en la medida en que ese papel lo pierdes, porque tu trabajo no es necesario, porque es prescindible, o es externalizable, o es automatizable, esa capacidad política de influencia se deteriora. Y este debate sobre cómo la capacidad de los ciudadanos de mantener políticamente, tengo este sesgo de politólogo quizás, cómo es posible de mantener una renta básica en términos de apoyo sostenido en el tiempo sin que los individuos tengan una posición de poder que les conforma el sistema económico, me parece que es central. Yo personalmente no tengo una opinión digamos cerrada sobre esto, pero me parece que esto es un debate central sobre el futuro de estos debates. Y sí responderé a la pregunta que han lanzado sobre por qué este requisito de los 12 meses de cotización. La clave es que en parte el ingreso mínimo vital no es una renta básica. Y el requisito es que el entendimiento del ingreso mínimo vital es que no era una renta de emancipación. Y este requisito, digamos, limitaba el acceso a aquellos individuos que han formado parte o que ya estaban de una forma u de otra en algún momento integrados en la vida económica, en el mercado de trabajo y que les impedir que se usara como renta de emancipación de jóvenes a lo mejor provenientes de hogares de rentas medias y altas que podían ser
some young people who wanted to emancipate and coming from families with a middle or high income level.
No está pensado como una
This is not considered as a basic income, but as a minimal vital income. And I think that, well, thank you very much, Philippe. What's your opinion, your final comment?
Okay, very quickly, because I need to go to another debate, which is about the question of whether Belgium can manage with a minority government. And so you have some experience in in Spain about trying to manage with a government that doesn't have a majority in parliament. We are over now 15 months after the election. We still don't have a majority being formed, perhaps at the end of this month. And so we have a debate about whether it's really necessary. So it's quite remote from the question of basic income. So I would love to engage in more discussion, especially in what Aina and then also Pepe said about the relationship between basic income and work and labor. And so what is the relationship between basic income and both the right to work and the obligation to work. But I won't have time for that. I'll just touch on one aspect of it in reply to your question, Mark, which is what about the jobs which no one would like to do if you have an unconditional basic income? Well, there are three possibilities. No one wants to do these jobs. One possibility is, of course, to automate them and to replace the people by machines. A second possibility, if the first one is regarded as impossible or unprofitable, is to improve the quality of the job. There are many ways in which you can make a job more attractive by treating your workers better, by having a daily schedule that is more compatible with family responsibilities, by making the work environment less noisy, by increasing telework if people want that. So there are many ways in which a job, the quality of a job in these many dimensions can be improved. Now the employers can get away with the shitty jobs because people are forced to accept them. If you give more bargaining power to the people, well, they'll have to make the job sufficiently attractive. And if neither of these two possibilities is either possible or acceptable by the employment, there is only one other solution, which is to pay more for these jobs. I like to say in academic context that one day, if a basic income is high enough, the people who clean our toilets at university will be better paid than the academics, than the professors. And I say this is only fair. So the jobs whose quality and is such as perceived by people, because there are also lots of differences in the perception of the quality of a job. Some people like to do a certain job and other people hate to do that same job. But if there are jobs that no one likes to do, but these jobs should be better paid, then the jobs of us academics and other people for whom the job itself has an interest. And so, of course, all this means that you can't jump to a quick basic income at 1,200 euros like in the German experiment. It has to come gradually. And of course, if it comes gradually, it cannot be a full substitute either for some aspects of social assistance, which you need top-ups for the handicapped people, for the people living alone, etc., etc. And of course, it's not at all a substitute for social insurance, where people pay, by way of being workers, pay social security contributions that will entitle them to a top-up in terms of pensions, in terms of unemployment benefits, over and above their basic income. But all this, of course, is subject of wider discussion for which we don't have time now. But I want to thank the organizers and the other two speakers. I find it so important to talk across borders about these issues and then to really understand the details sometimes of the programs that are being tried in the various countries, the difficulties in making further steps, and that holds also for the Reddito di Cittadinanza, who supports it, who is against it, what difference does it really make to the people, what are the administrative difficulties that are sometimes enormous and where you give all sorts of rights to the people and then never get what they're entitled to because it's so complicated or stigmatizing to get it, etc. And for all this, we need discussions across borders. So for all this, muchas gracias.
Well, thank the three of you, Philippe, Pepe, and Aina. Thank you so much for being here. there's no better signal than that to leave many things to be debated, because this means that there are lots of things to be said. We'll meet again. There will be a third dialogue, green or red and green, that will have to do with European rescue funds in general. And I'm sure that Ernest Urtasun and other people will be here. We'll tell you more about it. I'd like to thank again the three speakers. All the best, and I hope to see you in person or through the internet, transborder debates that are so fruitful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.